Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching NEWSROOM. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is Friday, the 10th of December, 2021. These are the stories that we will be talking about during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the importance of today. That is the International Human Rights Day. And we will be talking about not only all the laws that have been passed in Pakistan as far as human rights are concerned, also gender-based violence, women's rights, but we will also be talking about Kashmir, where human rights violations are rampant. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the negotiations between Iran and the world powers. We know that they have begun since Thursday in Vienna, and we also know that there are a lot of reservations by certain countries, especially the United States of America, Israel, even France, that has certain reservations as far as Iran is concerned. Whether these talks will be successful or not, this is going to be our topic for the second segment of the day. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about a female officer of the Islamabad, the police, who has been nominated by the United States Embassy for an award which recognizes women across the world for demonstrating exceptional courage. She is, of course, Assistant Superintendent of Police Amna Baig. We've seen her a lot of times on the social media, and her work is exemplary, and of course the United States government has awarded her exactly for that. Then we'll be talking about the Senate Standing Committee on Climate Change that yesterday recommended converting public transport for educational institutions into electric vehicles. Now, that is very important in the whole context of the fact that Lahore becomes one of the most, if not the most polluted cities across the world, not once but more than once in the last few days. This is as per certain reports that have emanated. Now, the Ministry of Climate Change has also done that in a briefing and has talked about this and more. And then we've talked about Lahore being topping the list for the most polluted cities. What needs to be done? Let's see how the government can cope with that. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about the BBC that has revealed the list of 100 inspiring and influential women from across the world for the year 2021. And the Afghan women, or women from Afghanistan, feature 50% or more on that list. Also on the list is Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel laureate from Pakistan. Let's begin with our first story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the International Human Rights Day. That is today. After 16 days of activism of gender-based violence, today is the day those 16 days of activism also end, and today is International Human Rights Day. Whether it be across the world in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, or here in Pakistan and across the world, human rights are of paramount importance, and laws have been passed in Pakistan as well as in other countries to combat those violations. More in the following report.
Absolute rights that everyone is entitled to as human being, regardless of race, color, religion, gender, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Human Rights Day is observed every year on 10th December, the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted in 1948 the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a milestone document of the time. This year, Human Rights Day theme is equality. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The principle of equality and non-discrimination are the heart of human rights. This includes addressing and finding solution of deep-rooted form of discrimination that have affected the most vulnerable people in the society, including women and girls, indigenous people, people of African descent, migrants, and the people with disabilities, among others. The Human Rights Charter of the World may be mentioned as a modern version of the farewell sermon of Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. First ever Charter of Human Rights, which has been given by Rahmatul lil Alameen 1400 years ago, is comprehensive course of social life. Humanity is a core whether we talk about international standards or religious one. As it is well said by Nelson Mandela, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity.
Humanity is extremely important, and to understand human values is even more paramount across the world in Pakistan. And that is why laws have been passed in Pakistan to oversee all the violations of human rights. To talk about the International Human Rights Day, the human rights violations, how we are combating it in Pakistan, we've been joined by Rabiya Javeri Agha. She is the chairperson of the National Commission for Human Rights. Ma'am, thank you very much to have joined us. First of all, would you like to highlight what your commission has been doing as far as the human rights are concerned in Pakistan? Ma'am, can you hear us? Also, there seems to be some kind of a technical issue, and till that is resolved, let's just give you a little outlook on what the International Human Rights Day entails. As has been shown in the report, it is in 1948 through a resolution on this very day that the International Human Rights International Human Rights Day is celebrated across the world. This is to ascertain and to control all the violations that happen, whether it be gender-based, whether it be towards children, whether it be towards communities, whether it be towards entire nations. Human rights are something that needs to be undertaken with utmost importance from the different organizations such as United Nations, that has been doing that through its different resolutions across the decades, or whether it be by individual countries across the world, whether it be in the West or in the East. Pakistan, for that matter, has also passed several laws as far as human rights are concerned, as far as the giving rights to the women and gender-based violence is concerned. There have been laws that have been passed by the government of Pakistan. Rabiya Javeri Agha, chairperson of the National Commission of Human Rights, joins us again. Thank you very much, Ma'am Agha, to have joined us. Let's begin with your commission, ma'am. How do you feel your commission has been working as far as the human rights and preserving the human rights in Pakistan is concerned?
Thank you very much, Omar. Nice of you to call me and to acknowledge the importance of Universal Human Rights Day, and to acknowledge the importance of the strong role that we have to play both in the government, in civil society, and in the media to actually push the message across that human rights is not something that should be neglected or ignored, but something that should be protected and saved. Before I talk to you about the commission, I think the message that has to go is that human rights is something we are born with. It is something that is inalienable. It is part of our existence. It is part of our definition of being a human being. And those rights are not given by anybody. They are validated by the state and legal. You have legal cover in the constitution and domestic law, but your right is your inherent right as a human being. So nobody can give you those rights, and nobody can actually take away those rights. The machinery in Pakistan for human rights, as you call it, the human right ecosystem, consists of a federal ministry of human rights in the federation, provincial human rights departments in the provinces. They represent the state, the policies of the government, the direction that the government wants to take with regard to human rights policies. There is also entities in the government in Pakistan known as commissions. Commissions are independent entities. They are sort of the apex of civil society. They get their mandate and their reason for existence, as they call reason, that from the public, from the people. They are the head of what would be known as civil society organizations. Now, the National Commission of Human Rights, which I just recently took over, all of literally 1 week ago, the 3rd of December, the day of that very tragic lynching, the commission had so far been dysfunctional for the last 3 years. So it's now just getting it back into motion, activating it. There are 3 arms to the commission. One is legislative, one is judicial. Sorry, that means we, as chairman of the commission, I and my members have judicial powers as of a civil court. So if we find that something has been done wrong, if people come to us with complaints, we can actually report statements, call for evidence, get information, documentation as a civil court. So that is our role in terms of redressing problems. So we have lots of people who come to us, there are literally thousands, who come to say that they are facing various issues. And if we can resolve them at our level, we do, or we then refer them to the relevant court. The second thing the Commission does, it's kind of a watchdog to government policies and legislation. So say we see something that the government is doing and we want to support it, or we say that this particular legislation of yours needs to have this looked at. So we advise the government on legislations they do, policies they may do, or gaps they may have. And we also submit independent reports to the government on where they should move if they to enhance or improve the human rights situation of the country. So it's an executive role, it's in a judicial role.
All right, ma'am. Now let's talk about human rights in Pakistan. I read the message of Ma'am Shiri Mazari as far as today's importance is concerned, and she talks about the different laws that have been recently also passed by the Parliament. That includes the Protection of Journalists and Media Professionals Act, that has now been made into law. Also, the Protection of Women's Law. Also, the different shelters that have been put into place for the children and for the transgenders as well. Do you feel that the government is doing enough as far as protecting our communities are concerned?
Well, I'll tell you something. In terms of legislation, Pakistan is one of the most strongly legislated countries in the world. Our transgender bill is actually par excellence, and that's one of our flagship bills. It actually was done during my time, and Senator Rabiya Khalid moved it. And it is one of the most humane bills in the world, because other bills, when someone says that I have a gender issue, they are subjected to very, very humiliating medical, psychological examinations. India has such a very strict law, and that's very dehumanizing. And in Pakistan, we have what is known as self-determination of gender, which is a very, very sort of humane way of looking at people who are facing gender identity crisis. Pakistan has got some great stories to tell in terms of its legislation. During my time when I was Federal Secretary, Ministry of Human Rights, we also passed Juvenile Justice Act, which talked about how you don't send children to prisons, but you then use a word which is known as diversion. So juvenile delinquents can go and do social service. They live separate. They have a right to bail immediately. They can go to hostels, but they do not have to live in. They can divert their sentence through social work. So that's a very innovative law. The issue and the women's laws are very empowering. And as you rightly mentioned, Pakistan has a series, and all the provinces have a series of protocols for women. So you have helplines. 1099 was the helpline that we set up at the shelter. You have crisis centers. You have protection homes. You have shelters which actually women can live in. One of the best shelters is the Islamabad Women and Family Protection Center. So all the ducks are in place, as they say. The issue happens and two things affect us. One is when you have the law and people don't know that law. If you're very quick in making laws, you have to ensure that those laws and information of those laws are disseminated to the lowest level. So sometimes we may have a brilliant law,
but if the people are not cognizant of that law, then how can that law be used by those people?
Exactly, that's the point. So how do you disseminate? इतनी जल्दी हम कानून बनाते जा रहे हैं. How do we let everybody know that, oh, there's a new law coming into place? Oh, there's a law that says bonded labor is bad. How do we disseminate that information? So इसमें obviously the media has a very strong role. Also, there's a lot of sensitive. Again, you people have a strong role. training of law enforcement agencies, training of the judiciary, training of the prosecution to test the systems that are in place.
All right. Ma'am, Agha, COVID-19 as a pandemic has also really exacerbated the human rights values of a lot of people in different communities across the world, including Pakistan. What needs to be done in order for the different genders, whether it be women or children or certain sects of the society that have to bear the brunt of violence, to make them understand that there are laws for them, and how to reassure them that the government is there for them. There are different NGOs also that are there for them. How can we reach those people?
Well, I was part of a report we did on COVID and human rights, and we took 8 areas of concern that the UN Secretary General had talked about with regard to COVID. So women, children, prisons, detention centers, education, the economic impact. There is obviously COVID has really impacted. The biggest impact that we've seen is that you have serious issues of domestic violence. Violence has gone up exponentially in Corona because the woman is got no refuge. The man is frustrated at the house. He can't earn. He's a daily wage earner. And so there is the woman in the house. She may be a victim of that violence. She doesn't know how to escape, and she is at home with her perpetrator. So we saw extreme rise of domestic and child abuse, what we did at the Ministry of Human Rights when I was there, we put in a secret code. We made an app for telephone users that could just press a button and call for help. In Australia, they have a very interesting thing. Canada, sorry. If you are subject to domestic violence and you can't talk on the phone, and your husband or whoever is beating you is there, you simply say, I want a pizza. You phone up this number and you say, I want a pizza delivered to this address. And that number knows that it's not really a pizza, you need help. So that's how they did it in Canada. We did it through a button that you could, a helpline button that you would press on the mobile app.
But again, Ma'am Agha, with due apologies, we need to make all of these laws, all of these methodologies that have been put into place by organizations such as yours or the government. I mean, the reach needs to come to that common man or woman in the little village in Sindh or in Balochistan or in Punjab, so that he or she knows his or her rights and what he or she can do in case something happens to her or him.
You're absolutely right, Omar. The thing is, how do you do it? Advertising is so expensive. Print electronic media is not accessible to everybody. This is where there has to be CSOs. Every company should have. Now, when you go to big corporations and you say, can you do a message for us? They say, hum to already CSR kar rahe hain, ab hamare paas aur paise nahi hai. I think this is something that, I don't know, it maybe should be made mandatory. I know in Cambodia, they had a very high rate of child trafficking. And they literally made it mandatory that every single workplace, at the back of every rickshaw, everywhere, they had posters on saying, stop child trafficking. So I don't know, maybe we need a very concerted thing. And this, I guess, is when media, corporations, civil society can help.
All right. Ma'am, final question to you. If we go a little bit beyond Pakistan, we have all the human rights abuses that are happening in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, also what happened to the Rohingya Muslims, also what is happening in Palestine. So many forms of very severe and blatant human rights violations. Whose responsibility is it? Where does this onus of responsibility come to as far as controlling what these different countries are doing as far as perpetrating the human rights abuses are concerned?
Well, yes. You see, all over the world, we are seeing a big growth of right-wing policies, and in that, the world after the World War realized that we had to live together. And I think those lessons that the World War taught have been forgotten. And now there is extreme people have become very jingoistic, very nationalistic. The atrocities to Kashmir have been highlighted time and again. Article 370 of the Constitution that was revoked. You look at, you mentioned Palestine. You look all over the world. There's a growth. There's a growth of Islamophobia in Europe. There's restrictions on how you dress. As Muslims, women are not allowed to wear hijabs in many countries. So that's their right to determine how they want to dress or to pray or where they want to pray. So I think this is a growth of what is known as a sort of very exclusive way of thinking, what the World War taught us.
There is a very barbaric way of thinking as well, ma'am. And I really hope that on this day, the realization comes to those organizations that can wield that pressure and power on those countries that are involved in such barbaric human rights violations, that they need to stop, or else put some kind of sanctions on such countries and the cities that are involved in it, so that the world can be a safer place to live in for the women, for the children, for the men who are being subjugated to this violence. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, thank you so very much, ma'am, to have highlighted us and highlighted us with all of the work that you have done yourself during your tenure, and which is continued to be done by the current Ministry of Human Rights as well under ma'am Shiri Mazari. Thank you very much, ma'am Rabiya Javeri, Agha Sahiba, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this very important day, that is the International Day of Human Rights. Now, Shiri Mazari Sahiba, who's the Minister for the Ministry of Human Rights, says that the ministry has also pioneered research on very important topics that includes women's inheritance rights, violence against women, child abuse, child labor via radio, television, and even truck art. I mean, that is very important, because in this day and age, communication is a basic tool that can make you all information reach to the common man in all the nitty-gritties of the world. Now, she says we have also pioneered research on these topics and reports on the plight of women prisoners, a study analyzing the human rights implications of COVID-19, a child labor survey which is being conducted in Pakistan after a gap of 30 years, a national action plan on business and human rights as well. And she also adds that her ministry has sought to safeguard the fundamental human rights by organizing training workshops across Pakistan for the judiciary and the police. It's very important for all these segments of the society to understand what those basic human rights are and how to safeguard them if somebody contacts them, how to go forward with that. Saman Ahsan, who's the manager, United Nations Women, joins us online. Thank you very much, Saman, to have joined us. Saman, it's a very important day today. And of course, the United Nations Women is one such organization that has been progressively working for the rights of women. Are you satisfied with the work that has been done as far as women's rights is concerned, whether that be prisoners, whether they be women who are subjugated to violence, whether they be transgenders?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this program. Today indeed is a very important day, which is International Human Rights Day. And I'm really glad to be sharing my thoughts with you. Can you hear me? Just checking.
Yes, of course I can hear you. I just asked you the question. I think you didn't understand, you didn't get it because of some lag.
I joined a bit late and I got half
your
of
organization,
your
UN Women, is working diligently as far as the rights of women, transgender community, the girl child is concerned. A lot of laws have been put into place by the government as well. A lot of work has been done by the government as well, whether it be for the women's rights or the girl child's rights or the transgender rights. Is it enough, or does more need to be done?
That's a very good question. I think more always needs to be done, and gender equality and women's and girls' human rights is an issue that no country in the world has been able to address completely, and every country needs to work on this, including Pakistan. But I do feel that a lot of work has already gone into it, and in Pakistan we
All right, there's some kind of a lag as far as the sound is concerned, but as soon as that is resolved, we'll get back to Ma'am Saman Ahsan. Yes, you were saying there was a certain lag, so we couldn't hear you properly. We can hear you now.
Yes, I don't know what you heard, but I said a lot more still needs to be done. But a great deal of progress has already been made, showing the government of Pakistan's commitment towards ensuring the human rights of the women and girls who make up almost 50% of the population. There is a strong legislative framework. A lot of pro-women and progressive laws have been enacted, especially over the last decade. And now we need to work towards implementation of those laws. And the federal and provincial governments have shown great commitment towards that. And UN Women is also supporting them both for the legislative reform and review and also for implementation of those laws in line with Pakistan's international commitments. Internationally, also, Pakistan has signed 7 out of the 9 core treaties on human rights and has played a very important role in the international conventions. For example, the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other such conventions. Pakistan plays a very active and significant role in those. So, as I said, we still need to work a lot until all the women and girls of our country obtain their rights and are able to act as full and active citizens of the country. We will not be able to see
All right, ma'am, Saman Ahsan, as far as the different laws are concerned, and you talked about those laws that have been passed, and of course they are very important, as you said also Pakistan has been instrumental as far as the protection of human rights values are concerned, but nevertheless it's also very pertinent that the common man or woman or child understands how to access those laws and that these laws exist. In fact, we through our media are doing our level best in order for the common man to understand what his or her rights is. It is important on this day, that is International Day, International Human Rights Day, that we understand our values, our rights as human beings, and how it is important for other members of the society to understand those rights as well and to respect each other. The respect of any sect, any section of the population is extremely important. That is how we'll prosper and we'll strengthen ourselves as a society and as a nation. Our next segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Vienna talks, the nuclear talks that are going on with Iran, between Iran and the P5+1. There are certain reservations from countries such as the United States of America, even France, and Israel, of course, is trying its level best that no tangible results come out of these talks. More in the following report.
After 7 rounds of talks, it's fair enough to raise the question that where does Iran's nuclear deal stand now? Despite significant inclinations of European powers to reinstate the landmark Iran nuclear deal, serious differences between the United States and Iran cast deep shadow over prospects of breakthrough. As the 7th round of Vienna talks ended last week, the rift between different sides' approach to revive the Iran nuclear deal was further exposed, which brought the nuclear negotiations to stand still. Indicating a glimmer of hope, negotiations between Iran and world powers have resumed after a brief pause, signaling that diplomacy won another chance. European Union diplomat Enrique Mora, who chaired latest meeting of the deal's remaining signatories, Iran, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia and China, expressed optimism and renewed sense of purpose to work on a tighter deal, while suggesting that it is becoming more imperative with time to reach an agreement quickly. According to the U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price, Washington plans to send a delegation led by Robert Malley, the special U.S. envoy for Iran, to Vienna over the weekend. Indicating Iran's serious will to enter effective and result-oriented talks, Iranian chief negotiator Ali Bagheri stated that Iran proposed views on 20th June draft and it will continue talking. Elaborating the outcome of recent round of talks, Russian ambassador to United Nations Mikhail Ulyanov emphasized that recent talks have circumvented many misunderstandings. Since some contentious points are still open for lengthy discussion, it's crucial for participants to approach the deal with realism and reconciliatory spirit.
To discuss more on this nuclear deal and the future of this nuclear deal, we've been joined by Ali Mustafa. He's a nuclear expert. Ali, thank you very much to have joined us. Ali, when you look at these talks, the apprehensions, the question marks, why are there so many apprehensions from the West's part as far as the future of this deal and Iran's complicity is concerned?
Thank you so much for having me. There are many challenges towards the overall scenario. The first being that non-proliferation and the issue of nuclearization of Middle East is such an important issue, which has a potential to have a domino effect So that's why initially Iran, being a country with a very advanced nuclear program, is a matter of concern for the international community. It would have wider implications towards the Middle Eastern security architecture, but it would also have problems regarding the overall non-proliferation regime as well, which is delegated on the balance between countries exercising the right towards peaceful uses of nuclear energy, yet at the same time refraining from going towards the weapon side.
But Ali, looking at the whole scenario, do you feel optimistic as far as some kind of a deal is concerned? Or as per France, you feel that Iran is playing for time, or as per the United States or Israel, who are even talking for and discussing military drills in case of an extreme scenario? Why are they thinking even of an extreme scenario?
I think there is general mistrust on both sides when it comes to Iran's nuclear behavior. For the last 20 years, Iran was caught not in compliance with its obligations under the International Non-Proliferation Treaty. So there are rooms for apprehensions towards Iran's nuclear program, and similarly Iran has concerns with regards to the Western approach as well, and more precisely the United States of America's approach towards dealing with the Iranian nuclear program. The best chance towards curtailing Iranian nuclear program was achieved in 2015. However, because of the unilateral abrogation by President Trump, there is this divide and there is this mistrust, and we're talking about 8th round of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and trying to come up with a solution to that. I think right now, more than ever, there is room for optimism. However, it's better to be cautious about it. There's a new regime in Iran which is hardline. There is a new regime in Israel which is also a very hardline regime. United States of America cannot indulge itself into another Middle Eastern debacle. So therefore there is room for mistrust, but I think there's still room that a deal can be reached, because having a diplomatic solution to this problem would be a win-win for all sides, whether it be the international community, whether it would be the US, and whether it would be Iran, because Iran would get a lot out of it as well. Towards the end of
now,
it.
speaking of the United States of America, you remember well that Joe Biden had put this as his election manifesto, that the US will go back to the JCPOA. At the same time, I understand that the apprehensions that the US might have had or still have, but at the same time, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations also has told the TASS news agency that several of the misunderstandings have been removed. Do you feel the misunderstandings or the reservations can be removed, or will it take more time?
I think certainly if there is an honest will towards achieving solutions to these problems, I think they can be. However, I believe that the new Iranian regime wanted to start off from the highest negotiating position, in which they did that. There was a new negotiating team coming from Iran, so they also had to take time in order to understand the solution, to understand the problem as well. So I think therefore, we've had these hiccups, and the hiccups include the reason of the mistrust between the US and the Iranian regime as well. But I think more than ever, now is a good time to look for the future and look towards having at least better rounds of talks in the next 9th round. Even if the 8th round that we're having right now, even if they become successful, things won't be sorted out in this instant. I think it's going to prolong for a couple of months. But if there is an honest will that if all the sides see that in this round, I think there is room for caution, but there's also room for optimism as well.
There seems to be quite a room for optimism, because Iran says that it is quite sincere as far as its inclination or intentions are concerned. Nevertheless, the US is sending a delegation next week to UAE. You talked about other rounds of talks as well. Do you feel these rounds and these delegations going to the UAE and further talks could lead to a complete removal of the apprehensions, A? And B, we know very well that Iran wants a complete unblocking of all the sanctions, which the US does not want, because it wants certain sanctions to remain. In this scenario as well, do you feel there could be a proper middle ground where the two countries could sit together and thwart out the future of the JCPOA?
I think it has to be that way. Even if you look at back in 2015, there were many misgivings. There was a huge gap of mistrust, but all sides came together and reached a middle ground. So I think there is room for that. But since the 2018 unilateral withdrawing of the JCPOA by the US, there is apprehensions on the Iranian side that what if the next regime goes out of the agreement as well? So can the Joe Biden regime actually pacify the Iranian fears and try to promise them that such a thing won't happen if 3-4 years down the line? And similarly for the US, it's also a matter of their domestic politics playing a huge role as well. In case the Joe Biden administration does release the blocked funds that Iranian state has in the United States, and Iran still does not roll back its nuclear program, then it would be a major foreign policy failure by the Biden administration, or so it may it may seem like that in the domestic politics front as well. So I think there are apprehensions on each sides, but I think a diplomatic solution would be the best solution considering the overall geopolitics of Middle East as well.
Now, speaking of geopolitics, we know that Israel does not want any deal to go through between Iran and the P5+1. Do you feel Israel will manage to convince countries such as the United Kingdom? We've heard of the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom also talk about that after her talks with her Israeli counterpart. The US has also had these talks. Other countries are also being pressurized by Israel. Do you feel Israel will manage to somehow convince other countries as far as the future of JCPOA is concerned?
I think if these negotiations do not become fruitful, then we might see the Israeli influence on major Western capitals actually increasing. The ultimate nightmare scenario would be an Israeli strike coordinated by other Western countries. However, I think that in the near to short term, there is a room towards diplomacy, and diplomacy being the best solution. I think if these negotiations fail, in the first instance, there might be more sanctions on Iran by one of these Western countries which are negotiating with Iran. And if even that does not work out, then perhaps the Israeli influence would be enough to go towards the ultimate nightmare scenario of attacking Iranian nuclear sites. But I think right now it seems difficult because major Western powers, after their withdrawal from Iraq and more recently from Afghanistan, do not want to engage and get bogged down into another conflict in the greater Muslim world.
Well, that we'll only see with time if that really holds true. Nevertheless, Joe Biden has also warned Iran of additional measures if diplomacy does fail, and it has warned it will White House says that it will block Iran's ability to earn revenue if these nuclear talks fail. Why these pressure tactics?
I think there are pressure tactics by both sides, and depending upon what each side can leverage, certainly US has the most clout in the international markets, and their sanctions are can or have been quite detrimental to Iran's economy. Yet at the same time, the Iranian leverage has been ramping up uranium enrichment to up to 60%. So both sides have these leverage which they can play out in order for each side to back off and come back to the table. So I think these are basically pressure tactics to tell the other side the seriousness of their commitment to do whatever it takes to roll back Iranian nuclear program. Yet at the same time, we have seen it in the past that these sanctions have had limited effect, very limited effect towards the overall Iranian nuclear behavior and Iran's behavior in the Middle East in general. So I think Iran has seen 20 years of sanctions, particularly towards its nuclear program. They won't be very successful. However, this is right now the only option US has, less than other Western countries putting sanctions on Iran as well.
All right, thank you very much, Ali Mustafa, talking to us about the JCPOA and the future of this nuclear deal between Iran and the Western countries. It is nevertheless salvaging a nuclear deal that was signed in 2015. And let's hope that these talks, or a different round of talks, even if there are many more rounds of talks between Iran and the other countries that are part of the JCPOA, that some kind of a middle ground is reached, and that all the countries, especially including Iran, can move forward with some lessening, if not complete removal of all the sanctions that have been in place since 20 years on it. We wish the JCPOA and the future of the JCPOA all the very best. Now let's come very quickly to our last few stories. The first of all is on the Assistant Superintendent of Police, Amna Baig, who's been nominated for the International Women of Courage Award. This was announced on Thursday by the United States Embassy. This award recognizes women around the world for demonstrating exceptional courage and leadership in advocating for peace, for justice, for human rights, gender equality and women empowerment. And on this very day, that is International Day for Human Rights, this is a very, very positive development as far as Pakistani women is concerned. This shows that Pakistani women are also the forebearers in different sections of the society. Here we have the ASP, of course, Amna Baig, and we've seen a lot of her. We have heard a lot of good things about her on the social media and on different news as well. We wish her all the very best, and we hope she gets the award. Now let's come to our next story, ladies and gentlemen, that concerns pollution. Now we have talked about in our past programs as well as how Lahore has been nominated as the most polluted city in the world, not once but more than once. Many different reasons for it, industrial pollution, smog, and of course so on and so forth. There are many reasons, but nevertheless in this spate of months, Lahore becomes quite unbearable, especially for asthmatics, especially for those who are vulnerable or are immunocompromised to live normally. Because of the smog, they of course, they get a lot of diseases, especially lung diseases, and those who are asthmatic get a lot more worse as far as their asthma is concerned. Nevertheless, in all of this situation, it has been proposed that electric vehicles be used for school transport, that is for educational institutions. The Senate Standing Committee for Climate Change on Thursday has recommended this update or this change as far as the region is concerned, that public transport for educational institutions be only done by electric vehicles. This was done at a briefing from the Ministry of Climate Change, and of course talking about the air pollution and how the fumes from the cars contribute to more than 40% of the air pollution as well. Now Lahore, as I've told you, also tops the world as far as the most polluted cities is concerned. The city's air quality index was 443, but this puts us in the hazardous category with regard to the PM 2.5, which is a particular matter. This is of course a lot of scientific jargon that many of you don't understand, but the crux of the matter is that because of this air pollution, because of the smog, as you can see in the parallel window as well, life becomes quite unbearable in cities such as Lahore because of this, and measures need to be taken and are being taken by the government in order to curtail this. Let's hope that comes to an end, and a very positive end at that, so that the next year at this very time period we can heave a sigh of relief. Now our last story is we always try to end on a positive note. So of course this time also the British Broadcasting Corporation, otherwise known as the BBC, has revealed a list of 100 most inspiring and influential women from the world for the year 2021. And what is surprising in that is around 50% or more of those women are from Afghanistan. A lot of those women have changed their names, have not put their real names. Nevertheless, not only the Afghan women feature amongst the 100 most influential women in the world for the year 2021, but also Malala Yousafzai, our very own Nobel laureate and recently married, is also part of the 100 most influential women. Women, as we've always talked about since today, are a very important part of our society, and we need to encourage them and we need to back them in whichever field they want to choose. With that, we end today's segment of Newsroom. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with new story segments that pertain to you, us in Pakistan. In the meantime, kindly stay safe, follow the SOPs, get yourselves vaccinated, and go for a better, prosperous and environment-free Pakistan. Have a great weekend. Allah Hafiz.